Lord, won't you save me from all of this insanity? Seems like all my...
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Is God Real podcast. We're happy that you're with us today. And we're also extremely happy that we have Brother James Burke with us this afternoon. Today we will be talking a little bit about a subject that makes some of us uncomfortable. And that is offering, giving, tithing, and what it means to your life, to the church, and what it means also to the spreading of the gospel. And I want to welcome Brother James Burke. Thank you for being with us today, Brother James.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Brother James is actually our church treasurer, and he's not only our church treasurer, he's an elder here in the church. He has been rooted in our church for many years. His parents were rooted here in the church, and he is somebody who I look up to very much. And I am extremely happy to have him here with me today. I think that we can all learn a little bit from him and get his opinion because he works in this side of things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, Brother James, we want to know a little bit about you. Brother, tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, what do you do? What brought you to the church? A little bit about your family.
Well, I work for Hobby Lobby, and I've worked for them in September. It's going to be 50 years.
Wow.
Started out as a full-time stockman, worked my way to a manager, ran a store for about 25 years. And then I went and was a district manager up in Ohio for 3 years. And then after that, I went back to corporate here in Oklahoma City, and I ran the loss prevention department since that time. And you know, from churches, like you said, I grew up here at the Oklahoma City Family Church. Had a wonderful pastor, Brother Marvin Francis, as a teenager. You know, it's good to have people you can talk to.
Yeah.
You know, and he had a lot of wisdom, and he actually married Terry and I, and we will have been married 50 years this summer. And that's a little bit about our life. But I first became a church clerk in 1978 in the Owasso Church of God of Prophecy there in Owasso, Oklahoma. And it was a small church, but we averaged probably 30 to 40 on Sundays. But our church has what they call kind of a minimum that they'd like to pay the pastors, and even with that congregation, we were able to do that, and because most people at that church had good jobs, and they all paid their tithes and gave in offerings, and you know, I really struggled when Terry and I got married. We moved into a new house. And we hadn't planned on her getting pregnant. You know, life happens.
Yeah.
And so we ended up financially, it was going to take her salary and my salary just to make the house payment and all the bills. Well, she got pregnant the month we moved into the house. So 9 months later, she wasn't working. And it put a tremendous stress on us financially. And my job, I got bonuses at the end of the year, so I found myself delaying my tithes and saying, well, I'll pay them when I get my bonus. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we really struggled, and Terry and I, and we ended up we made the decision. We sold our car. We only had one car at that point. And having a small child and us having one vehicle, that was tough. Because if she had to go somewhere, I had to figure out another way of getting to work. And but you know, God is merciful, and one of the things we learned in those early years is you have to put God first.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the problem with people is often I see a direct connection between people's heart and their love for God and their pocketbook.
Yeah. You know, Brother James, I'm glad that you said that, because I think all of us, we all struggle with that. And, personally myself, growing up, you got to know my grandmother, and my grandmother she was a tither. Her offerings and tithes and God, she took in very little. She didn't have an income. She was older, but everything that she had, she gave, not only to the church and to the ministry and her tithes, but she was a person that gave to other people, and God blessed her. God always blessed her. And she was extreme sometimes, I remember she used to always tell me, you got to pay your tithes. Every money that you get, you got to pay your tithes. You got to give offering to the church. Lord's going to bless you. And, she's this old school mentality, right? Where one day they were like, well, we need to pray for this brother. He's having financial hardships. And she would say, well, does he tithe? And then, I don't know. Well, if he doesn't tithe, we're not praying for him, because he's doing that to himself. And that was my grandmother. My grandmother believed in tithing and in offering, because not only did she believe that God would return it to us, in provision, but also in our lives. And I think that that's something that we need to understand. A lot of times we see, especially today in today's churches, we can scroll down social media and see these what they call prosperity preachers, right? That say, if you just sow this amount of money, tomorrow you're going to wake up and be a millionaire, right? Or the Lord's going to give it to you, 3 times fold or 10 times fold or whatever it may be. And we take that as a literal sense of we're going to receive it back in riches and gold and things of that sort. But I think that there's so much more that we need to understand about what the Bible tells us in giving. And we'll kind of jump into some of the questions and some of the things that I believe, as just regular people, we all have questions. And one of the things that I see a lot, especially on comments and social media and things of that sort, are people will say, well, tithing isn't biblical. Tithing isn't a thing in the Bible. This is something the church made up. And as I was going through some scriptures this morning, I saw this verse in Numbers 18:25 through 29, and it says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Levites and say to them, when you receive from the Israelites the tithe I give you as your inheritance, you must present a tenth of that tithe as the Lord's offering. Your offering will be reckoned to you as grain from threshing floor, or juice from the winepress. In that way, you also will present an offering to the Lord from all the tithes you receive from the Israelites. From these tithes, you must give the Lord's portion to Aaron the priest. You must present as the Lord's portion as the best and holiest part of everything given to you. So when we talk about tithing and people say, well, it's not biblical. And why do we give it to the church? Right? It says it here in the Bible, to give it to the priests. And I think that unfortunately we've also seen in our times, churches that maybe have mismanaged funds. It happens in every corporation. You work for Hobby Lobby, I'm sure it's happened there. In every company that you can think of, there's been people who have mismanaged funds or been dishonest. But it really, I think, isn't up to us to make that judgment call. I think that goes on, right? At that point, there's God, and there's other people that are above you to make that call. For us, it's just it's something for us to just do what God tells us and leave the rest to him. And, it is biblical, and it's something that, again, a lot of people will say it's not biblical. It's not. Tithing isn't biblical. Tithing is something we made up. What would you say to people that think that?
Well, it starts right from Genesis, where Cain and Abel, they were supposed to give offerings to the Lord, and that's so it starts right from the beginning. Yeah. And I had some scriptures I looked up. The Old Testament speaks about tithing and offering and the importance under the law. And, of course, a lot of people, I think they look and says, well, that's in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And but there's not as much talking about tithes and offering in the New Testament as there was the Old. You can find a lot in the Old Testament in the requirements. But in didn't bring my glasses. Malachi 3:6 says, "Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are you robbing? How are we robbing you in tithes and offering? You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this." And that's kind of what I challenge people whenever they're struggling. If you're not paying your tithes, testing. It's what the Bible tells us to do. Yeah. And test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessings there will not be room enough to store it. So I think it's, I don't know where people get that the Bible doesn't teach tithes and offering, because it does, and there's tons of scriptures. And but one of the things that whenever I was studying some of this in the New Testament, Christ admonished a lot of them because they were sticking all these things by the law, but they weren't loving people. They weren't showing compassion to people. They weren't doing the things that Christ felt like they should be doing. He said he didn't come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill it. And his goal was to make things better. And so a lot of times people look at the Old Testament and they say, well, that's not for today. But and I'll be honest with you, I've been studying Genesis for the last month. And I told my wife, it's some of the stuff that's in there is disturbing.
Yeah.
And but you know what? We need to know what the history is too. And because they say history repeats itself, and if you don't want it to repeat itself, you need to see what they did and how you can change it. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, I was actually also thinking about this morning about the Cain and Abel story, and offering goes back again to the book of Genesis, the very beginning of time. And one thing I believe that we all struggle with is in giving our best, and giving what God deserves. And that was one thing that Cain struggled with, right? And he gave his offering to the Lord, but it wasn't, God didn't see it, and he didn't see favor in his offering, and he saw favor in Abel's offering because of their attitude, right? Because of their willingness to give to the Lord. And, one thing that I do like, one thing that I've always seen from my father is, he goes up there on Sunday mornings and he says, give. If you can give, and give with your heart. But if you don't want to give, and you're going to give, upset or not wanting to give, don't do it, because it's not received well from God. An offering
that goes back to what we talked about, the heart.
Yeah, it's the heart.
Where is our heart at? Because and I thought of that before you brought that up. I thought the same thing when you started talking about that. Is pastor, he doesn't want people to give unless they want to, and not out of obligation.
Yeah, because the truth is the
But
purpose of
I
giving.
think if you are where you need to be with the Lord, and that's what people I think need to examine.
Yeah.
Am I where I need to be with the Lord? It wouldn't be hard for me to give.
Well, the purpose of giving is not only obedience but gratitude. You know, I'm so grateful personally, Brother James. You know a lot of the things I've been through here in the last couple of years, and you know, for those of you who may not know my story, I recently gave my life to the Lord last year. I have a very strong, background. I worked in the cannabis industry for several years. That's how I supported my children. And, you know, when I gave my life to the Lord, I was in a weird spot because, you know, I was sick. I had kidney disease. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had my parents, you know, thank God. But my parents are in their 60s, you know. I didn't want to put a financial burden on them to take care of me and my children. So I remember asking God and telling God, Lord, you know, I knew that what I was doing was wrong. And I asked God and I said, God, I don't want to be rich. I just want to be able to support my children. And I trust in you. And that's all I want, Lord. And I'm putting this in your hands. And as of today, it's over. You know, I'm not going to continue in this type of work. And, you know, my children they're old enough to understand what I was doing. And they're, you know, they can attest that from that moment on, it ended for me. And it's funny that, you know, going forward, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know how I was going to be able to feed my family. I was on dialysis 3 times a week. I couldn't go back to work, and the Lord answered my prayer. You know, I didn't know I qualified for disability, and I got disability payments. And even from those disability payments, I thought to myself, oh Lord, what am I going to do with this? You know, this is not enough for me to feed my children and to take care of them. You know, disability payments aren't very much. Right. And I said, Lord, you know, I'm gonna trust in you. And it was hard for me in the beginning to start giving my tithes. It was hard for me to give offerings. And then the Lord started working in my heart. And, you know, I always have tried with my children to give them good experiences, you know, take them out to eat every now and then, take them to watch a movie. And I remember going one day to have lunch with my kids and, you know, tipping a waitress like $28 or something like that. I've always been a decent tipper. You know, when I've had the money and I was making money, I always tipped very well because I felt like, you know, they deserve it. It's hard work. But then I'd come to church and I'd throw $1 in the offering plate. And the Lord really tugged at my heart that day. And he said to me, wow, $28 to this lady who served you for 45 minutes. Yet I've been serving you for over 40 years. And you struggle to put $1 in the offering plate. And that really got to me. And from that moment on, I told myself, never again, you know. And it's not about the amount of money. It's the show of gratitude that you give to the Lord. And there's a story in the Bible where they talk about the lady who put her last into the offering plate. And it wasn't the amount. It wasn't a huge amount. It was just the fact that she gave everything she had in gratitude to the Lord. And, you know, that changed my perspective. And I can tell you that since then, I've been giving my tithes And this has been a really abundant time for me, Brother James. I can really say that it's been a really abundant time for me with the little bit of money that I receive. Not to bring you guys into my personal business, but I've been able to purchase everything you see around here. Microphones, cameras, lights, everything that we needed to be able to start this podcast. Something that the Lord has provided for me, because he called me to do this work. And my kids are well. They have nice shoes. They have good clothes. They get to eat, in restaurants on Sunday afternoons. I have gas in my car. I have, everything's paid. And at the end of the month, I still may have a few dollars in my account. And it's from the very little that I get. The Lord has been able to, in one way or another, just multiply that. And, in my personal life, it has been a great experience in the teaching to me from God that he will provide. If we're faithful to him, he'll provide to us. So, I think that, again, that's just my personal experience. And I appreciate you talking about your personal experience. But it's something that we need to look into. If you're struggling out there and you feel like you don't have enough and you don't have enough to give to the Lord, right? Oh, I don't have enough. If I have left over, think about that the next time that you're out eating at a restaurant. Think about that the next time that take your kids to Disneyland. How much more could you have, not only in financially, but in your marriage, in your relationship with your children, in your walk with Christ, if you would just be obedient to his word.
That's so true. So true.
So it's something that I think we all need to examine in ourselves. Like you said, brother, in your walk with Christ is where are you in your walk with Christ?
So often I don't think people take time to evaluate where they're at. I know Terry and I has done marriage classes in the past, and we went to couples retreats and stuff. And all of that, it's important that we take time to evaluate our marriage, our spiritual life, and are we closer to the Lord this year than we were last year? And because I found myself one time in my career, I had to work Sundays, and so I missed a lot of church services where I'd come in. I'd come in the middle of it, and I'd worked all day, and I was tired, and find myself. But after doing that for about a year, I started seeing spiritually I wasn't where I used to be. And so I think it's something we have to evaluate. And I think if we be sure that we've got our alignment spiritually with God, a lot of other things will take care of itself.
You're right. And, again, this is speaking from a spiritual standpoint. Yeah. But we also are going to deal with the other side, Brother James. This is one thing you're gonna like about my podcast is we talk about real issues here. And we're going to have people that are watching us today that maybe aren't walking with the Lord, that maybe are looking from the outside in. And I know some of their questions because we hear it a lot, right? And some people will say, well, I don't give to the church because the church, steals the money, or the pastor takes it and he's rich. And or whatever their reasoning may be, right? We see, people that unfortunately on social media or TV that have given pastors a bad name, or they have, $20 million mansions and they're, and buying aircrafts and all kinds of stuff, right? And it sometimes it gives people this perspective that the church is just a business that is out there to profit from you. I can tell you personally, my dad's a pastor. My dad's been a pastor since I was 3 years old. And we've never been rich. we've been far from rich. As a matter of fact, we struggled a lot when we were kids because my dad was in the ministry, and my dad drove school buses. I made very little money, and he was in the ministry at a young age. And I can tell you that even though we struggled, my dad, one thing that he's always taught us was to give, to give his tithing, his tithes, to give his offerings. You would think that as a pastor, right? My dad doesn't tithe or he doesn't offering, and maybe you can be a witness to this, brother, but
I will tell you, from a percentage of income, pastor probably gives a bigger percentage than anybody in the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is something that, my dad has taught me over and over, and he's always said, it doesn't matter if whatever you receive, you have to give. And it's because it's a form of gratitude to what God has given you, a small percentage, a small part of what God has given you. And again, you would think that being a pastor, because we see all these pastors on TV and stuff, that, my dad would be like, no, I'm not gonna give, but I see him invest back into the church, invest back into the things of the Lord, and it really, it's always showed me a lesson, on to be able to appreciate that from him, because it's taught us to give and give willingly, And again, I would say to those of you who do see that and are looking from the outside in and say, hey, well, I don't give my money to the church because they do this with the money, or they do that with the money, or whatever. We all have people above us, right? And at your company where you go to work every day, you take in maybe money, or obviously you produce money for the company, and you don't ask where it's going to go. Right?
Right.
You don't ask. You just go, you work 40 hours and you get paid for it. But, they're paying you a small percentage of what you generated for the company. And you never sit back and say, well, where's this money going? Who's going to benefit from this money? And we don't ask that, right? Because we trust that there's somebody at the top that's going to manage that money correctly. And it's going to help us to stay employed. And hopefully we're working, for a company that is an honest company, is involved in good things. Hobby Lobby is one of those companies that does a lot for the community and for the kingdom of God. But again, we go as just normal people to work for these companies, and we never ask. And one thing that I do like about our church in particular, and I don't know how other churches function, but one thing about our church in particular, Brother James, is we have these meetings where we put everything out in the open. Mm-hmm. This is what the church took in. This is what the pastor was paid. This is what we spent on this program. This is what we spent on this other program. This is what we sent out to missions. And it's down to every cent where that money went. And then from there, we have not only my father as a pastor, he has people over him that he also has to give accountability to make sure, again, that there's honesty in what we're doing. But overall, God sees everything, and you may think that those pastors that, have millions of dollars are getting away with something. Believe me, we're not getting away with anything. The Lord sees everything, and your intention of giving is what matters. What did you intend to give to? What are you supporting? What is your heart? Where is your heart and your mind in giving to the church or to an organization or to a cause? And that's really where it comes down to. After that, it's in God's hands. And we hope that the funds get to where they need to get to. But we never question some of those big companies, right? We go on GoFundMe, we just send the money. We go to World Outreach or whatever these and we never question that. But then it comes to the church, and we don't want to give. And yet, when times are tough, when we need something, this is where we come. We come to the church, and we come to the church to look for help. Now, I'm not reprimanding you and telling you don't come to the church because you didn't give. What I'm saying is it's something for us to reflect on and really understand that, unfortunately, it takes, we live in a world where it takes funds for us to keep the ministry going, for us to keep the church going, for us to be able to have lights at the church, for us to have music, for the programs that we do for the children, for the food that we give away during our potlucks and things that we have going on. It takes funds. This is the world that we live in today. And it's different, of course, to the times of the Bible, because people gave offerings of, their cattle, their fruits, things. This was the form of transactions that they used, monetary transactions that they used at that time. But today, I don't go and tell the gas attendant, hey, let me have a goat on 20. Yeah, fill up my truck. Here's a goat. It'd be funny if that's the way things were. But now everything is done with money, with paper money or your debit card or however it may be. So it's something for us to reflect on and understand that times have changed. Everything that we do has to come from somewhere. We don't have a magical account or, a tree in the back that we go pluck the money out of, right? This is from people who give, members here of the church, Brother James, that give and they contribute to these programs that you're able to take advantage of. And this is not just our church. I'm talking about churches all around the world that provide community services, that provide counseling, that provide drug counseling of men's homes, food to feed the homeless. All this has to come from somewhere.
It does. It
all has to come from somewhere. And it's people like yourself that fund these programs. So when you give to the church, this is what we're doing. We're here to serve the community. We're here to share the gospel of the kingdom of God. And that has been this way for ages and ages. So, Brother James, what would you say from the perspective of a church treasurer? I mean, is the church getting rich off of these people's offerings?
No. And, our one of the things I'd like to say about our particular church, because I do know about it, is, like I said, we have kind of a minimum that they would suggest for the pastors, but it's left to the local congregation of that what the pastor's salary is. And I'll be honest with you, I used to argue with your dad because there was 2-3 years I tried to get him a raise and he refused to take it. And that's frustrating from my standpoint, but because he would rather the excess, go to help the church. And it does cost a lot, our insurance alone on this facility is $1,500 a month. And then you look at the all the utilities, anywhere from $7,000 to $1,000 a month. So it cost a lot of money just to operate the building. Yeah. And sometimes people don't understand that, But like I said, I can see where the big ministries, where they're not affiliated and there's not any controls, where there can be abuse of that. And maybe, there's nothing wrong with wealth.
Yeah, of course.
If you utilize it. We talked about Hobby Lobby, and I've known the Green family since they actually came to church here back whenever I was growing up. So I've known them for years. But they give half their profits away every year to religious and church foundations and stuff. And God has done nothing but bless them for that. And a lot of people look at it and say, man, why would you give that amount of money away? But they're still able to grow. They're adding 30 stores a year.
Yeah, they have tremendous growth.
Yeah, and they just continue to grow, and God just continues to bless them. But they are givers,
You're right. I mean, I've seen I see them a lot, in different things that are happening throughout the city. And honestly, before I came to Oklahoma, I didn't really know much about Hobby Lobby. We didn't have Hobby Lobby in California back then. Now they're there. Yeah. But knowing a little bit about their history and who the family is.
His dad was a pastor in our church. Mm-hmm. His mother was a minister. He was the only one of the, I think, 6 kids that ended up not being a pastor's wife or a pastor. And he considered himself kind of a black sheep of the family, because he wanted to go into retail. And but God had a different plan for him, and his plan was to help people financially across the world, and help spread the gospel.
I'm glad that you came out to that point, because I had a verse that I looked up this morning, and it says here in Acts 20:35, it says, "In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak, remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than it is to receive.'" And, the Lord calls us to help those that need help. And sometimes I struggle with this sometimes when I see homeless people out there asking for money. And, I come from, I have a good dad, and I came from a good home, but I spent a lot of time on the streets. And unfortunately, I saw a lot of drug use, a lot of drug users. And sometimes we tend to look at those people and say, well, I'm not going to give them any money. They want it for drugs.
Right.
But there's ways to help those people. Offer them a meal, bring them some water. If they need a place to stay, offer to get them a night in a hotel room. There's my son's sitting here, and he can attest that I do that pretty often. We see homeless people out there, and I feel, my heart feels for them, because I understand that, yes, a lot of them are in that position because they have drug habits that they can't kick. But I have a special place in my heart for those people, because I've been there, and I understand that addiction is difficult, but the Lord calls us to extend our hand to those people as well, those people who are in need, and offer them a meal, offer them something to drink. We had a gentleman that came by the church the other day, and he was trying to open the spout of water to be able to grab some water to drink and to give water to his dog. And I took him to the back. I gave him a few bottles of water. I gave him a box of Nutri-Grain bars, and it opened up an opportunity for me to be able to pray for him, Brother James. And I think that this is the way that we also show the love of Christ to those around us. Unfortunately, we're not a foundation that has funds to pay your bills or pay your rent. I know that there's foundations out there that do that. We are a small church that gets by the donations of the congregation. But personally, I'm talking about your own self. If you have the ability to show the love of Christ through feeding somebody, through helping them in their hard time, through maybe buying groceries for them, do it. One thing that I've been doing with my kids too, and I believe the last 2 years, it was difficult for us to get it done because of my condition. But for years, even before I came to Christ, on Christmas and Thanksgiving, we would sponsor a family. You remember that, Eli? We would sponsor a family where we would, get them a Thanksgiving dinner. I just post on my Instagram and say, hey, if there's somebody who's struggling out there to feed your family this Thanksgiving, please send me a message. And I'd send them enough for them to be able to buy themselves a meal. On Christmas, sponsor a family, help them get some gifts for their children. Christmas is one of my favorite holidays. I like to see my children smile. Those things are something that I've learned from my father, learned from my mother, from my grandmother, that have been a blessing to my life. And I'll give you an example, Brother James. This is actually a pretty wild story. When we came here in 2004, okay, I had gotten a job working for an attorney, and I was the first one. I got a job just a few days after getting here in 2004. And 2005, the mother of my first daughter came here so she could give birth to her daughter. And I remember it was right before Christmas. My dad came home with a whole family. We didn't have furniture yet. We had just got here. So we were living in an apartment. All our plans had really fallen through. I think you know some of the story. Right. But we were in an apartment. We didn't have any furniture. We were sleeping on air mattresses. And my dad came home with the whole family that he met. A lady, her mom, and I think it was 3 kids that she had. And we opened the door, and my dad's like, hey, we have this family who's going to stay with us. And I was like, Dad, what are you thinking? Like, we barely have any space. It was just me and my brother, my mom and dad. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, and he brought this family home. And that, that's always been my dad. One of us has always had to give up our room, or it's been like that our whole lives, So my dad comes home with this family, and about a month or 2 later, I moved out. And when I got my apartment, the mother of my first kid came here, and we got an apartment. And again, at this time, I didn't, I wasn't serving the Lord, but God's always worked in me for, one way or another. And I remember it was right before Christmas, like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas. And we were all sitting at a dinner table. My mom was cooking us dinner. We were with this family, and they were homeless. My dad found them at the shelter and had a feeling to help them. And I thought to myself, I asked this lady, and I said, what, do you have gifts for your children for Christmas? And she said to me, very plainly, I can't. I don't have anything to give to them. And Brother James, it killed me. I was having my first child, but I apologize. I was having my first child, and the mother of my first child had 2 kids already. So we were, I wasn't rich, but our bills were paid. Our rent was paid. I knew that I was going to get paid right before Christmas. I already had gifts for them. And I think I was like a week away from getting my next check or something. And I went and I emptied my bank account. And I think I handed her something like $800 or something, I don't remember exactly what it was. But I put it in an envelope, and I said to her, I want you to go and I want you to buy gifts for your kids. Please. Go buy them some toys, some clothes, whatever they may need. But please, I would love for them to be able to open gifts on Christmas. And it was something that I felt from God to do for her. And I remember arguing with the mother of my child on the way home. And she was like, what are you doing? But that was the last of our money, And I said, and I reminded her, and I said, our bills are paid. We have food in our refrigerator. We have gifts for the kids. I get paid like in a week. We're going to struggle for a week. We're going to be okay. These people have no way of getting money, and we're driving home. And I promise you that when I got home, I went to my mailbox and I opened the mailbox because we lived in an apartment complex. I opened the mailbox and I received a check I had gotten audited by the IRS 2 years prior to this, and it had never really resolved itself. But I got a check for almost $6,000. 6,000. And if she's watching this, you remember this, Crystal? We got this check. And I started to tear up because I knew at that moment that it was God that had given that to us. And you know, I don't say this for you to give, to expect to have something back, but the Lord sees your heart. And if your intentions are pure, he takes care of us. Mm-hmm. He provides for us. It says in the Bible that he is our provider. And, you know, I'll never forget that. I remember calling my dad and telling my dad, you won't even imagine what just happened. Because he didn't even know that I had given this money to the lady. I said, you know, I just gave, I forgot her name. She's no longer here, but I remember giving the money to her. I said, Dad, I gave her this money because I felt it. You know, I wanted her to have gifts for her kids. I came home and had a $6,000 check in my mailbox. And my dad right away reminded me, and he said, that's God. That's God. There's no other explanation for it. So that is the power of giving. You know, the power of giving blesses us. It's a blessing from God for us to be able to give, because a lot of us aren't in a position to give.
Yeah.
But if you're able to give, do it. Do it wholeheartedly, because God will bless you. God will bless you with health, with, you know, relationships, with provision. And that's just the hand of God moving in our lives. You know, Brother James, I know that there's some experiences that you've had in your life. Can you think of one or two of things that have happened in your life just based on the fact that you've been obedient in your giving?
Nothing there that kind of stands out, but if we've got time, I'd like to tell you a story. It's a little longer than I want it to be, but I'll try to make it short.
No, it's okay, brother. We have time.
I had that house almost been a curse that, you know, we moved into, and then financially we're in trouble. Well, we're looking probably 5, 6 years, 7 years later. We were in better financial shape, and my next door neighbor had came to me and he said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to build a fence, and I want to know if you're willing to go in on half on it." And instead of me saying sure, I asked the question, okay, well, what about the neighbors that have put their fence up? Are you going to give them half on theirs? And sometimes we ask questions that it's really irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know. And so he said, "Oh, no, they've already got their fence up. I'm not going to give them any money on it." And I told my wife, I said, "You know what? Let him put his fence up." And then a few months later, all three of my neighbors around me had put their fence up. And all I needed to do was connect the front, and I'd have an enclosed fence. So I ended up doing that. The Lord convicted me so bad. We had a pool in the backyard, an above-ground pool, and I couldn't go out in the backyard and enjoy it because I was afraid I'd see my neighbor, because I knew I didn't do what was right. I didn't give him half the money on the fence. And some of the time we make decisions, and thank God that God convicted me so much, and Terry will attest to it. I became so miserable because I knew I didn't do the right thing. And I went over to his house and I said, here's a check for, I said, I'll write you a check. I'll write a check for the whole side of the fence. I don't care. I said, I didn't do what was right. I should have, you know, paid half on your fence and not said anything. And later, I found out that this man, and they were a young couple just like us. Mm-hmm. They had 2 small kids. They were probably 6 and 8, something like that. But we found out that he was a preacher's kid. And my pastor that I had in Owasso, his dad was his pastor when he was growing up. I didn't know all this. And I'm literally over in his house writing him out a check, and tears are just flowing down my face because I wanted God to forgive me and show him that I did the right thing. So I hand him the check, and later I found out that my pastor knew him, and his dad was his pastor. And he wasn't going to church. His wife would go to church, and shortly after there, he gave his life to the Lord. And we were talking, and he said, "Do you know the reason why I got back with the Lord?" He said, "Because you came over and you made things right." I haven't told that story a lot because I'm not proud of it.
Yeah.
But it is a story that, for me, was life-changing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think it's important in life when we do see that we have opportunities to do and to give and to do the right thing, that we do it. And sometimes it's not always easy, but shortly after he gave his life to the Lord, he attended a large church there, and we used to watch him and his wife on TV. They would sing together, and he became a big part of the ministry of that local church. But I think back, had I not done the right thing, would he have ever given his life back to the Lord? And we don't know. The way we treat people, the way we interact with people, and I know this is a little off the subject, but
No, it's definitely on subject.
But that the things that we how we interact with people and the way we treat people, it's about Jesus talking about the way we treat people and help them and meet their needs. And his wife, about 2 years later, got cerebral palsy and ended up in a wheelchair. And I believe that God prepared him for that because he loved that woman. He took care of her. And I don't know that would have happened had he not come back to the Lord.
It's amazing, huh?
Yeah.
How God works. You know, Brother James, today we see, and I don't know if you're much of a social media guy, but today on social media we see these social experiments. It kind of brings me to thinking about this because we'll see these social experiments of somebody going up to, and I've seen them from many different YouTubers and things of that sort, but they walk up and they say, "Hey, you know what? I'm short $2 to buy this gallon of milk." Right? And somebody just said, "No, I'm not going to give you any money," you know? And then all of a sudden somebody's like, "All you need is $2 here. Here you go. Here's $2. And then that guy will be like, "Look, I was just looking for somebody that was going to help me out. Here's $10,000 as a reward." Now, you know, the reason I mention this is because if we could see the future of what God has in store for us, I think that our mentality would be so much different. You know, when you see these social media people and they do this social experiment, the person who didn't give, they're like, "Oh, well, wait a minute, I was going to give you," and they feel like they lost out, right? Because this other person got $10,000 and now they had the opportunity, but they didn't do it. And And I think that really translates a lot into the way that we think about giving to the Lord. If we knew the blessings that are going to come to our lives based on our obedience and our gratitude to God, I think that it would change our mentality so much more and make it, it'd make it not so tough for us to give what is of God. Everything that we have, everything that's provided to us, the sun, the stars, the air, the water, and then our finances comes from God. Mm-hmm. Everything that we have in this world comes from God. And the moment that we understand that and say, Lord, we're grateful. Here's a little bit back from what you've given me in a sign of obedience and appreciation to help maybe somebody else who needs that help. And, recently I had a friend who's going through a tough situation. And, she didn't really want my help. She was looking elsewhere. And I think, she's one of my best friends. And she didn't want my help. I said, listen, I can help you. She's like, no, I can't take from you. She knows my situation, knows I'm not making a lot of money, but she was in a bad situation. And, I sent her what she needed to cover a bill that she needed to cover. And I reminded her, I said, when we ask God, we don't understand and we don't know how that answer is going to come from God. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, don't take this as me giving it to you. Take this as God giving it to you. This is God answering your prayer. This is God. God gave it to me. I didn't just pop out of the air with money in my pocket. This is something that God gave to me. And when God gave that to me, He had predestined that amount for her. And not only is the Lord blessing her, He blessed me through being able to give to her in this time. And sometimes we don't know what God has for us, where it's going to come from, how it's going to come. And I think that if we were somehow able to see the future and what God has in store for us, it would change our mentality so much more to understand that God has something in store for us that we can't even imagine. He has so much more for us. And that bit that you're holding on to is nothing in comparison to what the Lord has for your life. And it's something that we need to ask God to help us with, because again, sometimes we want to hold on to the last bit of crumbs while the Lord has this giant pie waiting for us on the other side. And I love pie. That's why I did that reference.
I understand.
But it is just something that I think in my mind, man, if we were just to understand what the Lord has in store for us.
I have a hard time receiving. And Pastor tells me that.
Yeah.
Because he said, you take people out to eat, you give and give. But I often find, and I think God wants me to learn to receive, but I struggle with that because I feel like I need to be the giver. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the truth is that the Lord wants to also bless you and help you to receive. And sometimes...
And finally, Pastor would tell me, were you trying to take my blessing away?
Well, that's what it is. That's why I say to you, it's a blessing for somebody else to be able to give to you.
Right.
That's how I feel. I feel like, I have another friend who I believe it was my third podcast with, a very great friend of mine. He's doing life in prison. And I send him a little bit of money every month, because he doesn't have any family anymore. And, just a couple days ago, I went to go, to go put money for him. And my mom has a very small income from her retirement. And, she takes that money and she spreads it. And she also makes bread to sell to be able to donate to St. Jude every month. And my mom said to me, I want you to send these $50 to your friend. And I was like, okay, and she was like, the Lord put it in my heart to send to him. And, I spoke to him and I said, hey, I just deposited some money in your account. This is from me. And this other $50 is from my mom. And he was like, what? He's like, your mom? And I said, yeah. I said, my mom, the Lord put it in her heart to send you a little bit of money. And my friend has a big ministry inside the prison system. He's been serving the Lord since 2016. And he, just like the rest of us, he's human. And I can't imagine what he goes through on a day-to-day basis being locked in a cell and knowing that, he may never come home. And he has his hard times. And he that day that I spoke to him, I knew something was wrong. And I said, how are you? He said, I'm okay. It's not in him. And I said, is something you want to talk about? He said, no. And I said, well, I'm going to be praying for you, brother. And he said, okay. Later on that evening, he sent me a message. They have tablets now, and they can send text, like text messages, kind of. He sent me a long message, and he said to me, Jimmy, he said, you wouldn't understand how much your friendship means to me. And he said, today I called you because I needed to hear from you. I needed to hear from you. He's like, every couple of years or so, I go through this funk in my life where I'm tired. He's like, I'm tired of being in prison. I'm tired of this same life. And I wish that I could go home to hug my kids. And it really tugged at me because I get to come home every day and hug my children. And I ran the streets with this gentleman for several years. I know him. He's a good man. I knew his mom. I know his brother. And, the Lord has put in my heart to help him out. But we have maintained this relationship like brothers. And our relationship has gone from a street relationship where we, ran the streets and did dumb things together to now we talk to each other over the phone and we pray for each other. We talk about the Lord. We talk about our struggles. And he sent me this message and he said, the fact that he was like, it's not about the money. He goes, but when you told me your mom had something for me, he's like, you sent me something. You're always telling me that you're praying for me. And I told him, I said, I come to the prayer and I ask the people here at the prayer to please pray for you. The church is praying for you. I've asked for prayer on the podcast. He goes, he said, was a reminder that God loves me. And sometimes we don't understand what that generosity or that moment that you can tell somebody that you love them and that you're there with them, no matter if it's through a couple dollars, no matter if it's through prayer, no matter if it's through friendship, it can change somebody's life. It can remind them that the love of Christ is with them and it shines through you. And, he sent me this heartfelt message and it also reminded me of how much God loves me. How much God has seen me through. And it's given me a different outlook on life, because now, Brother James, when in the beginning, when they told me I was sick, I was like, oh, it's over. This is where I'm going to die. And I started saying goodbye to my kids, and every time they found something different, I was like, this is it. This is over for me. And little by little, God has been showing me that his plans are different to what I thought. And he's taught me how to rely on him, not only for my health, but for my finances, for my children. He's just taught me to trust him, And now when I get to the doctor and they give me bad news, I'm just like, so what? I'm like, so what? I get it. You're doing your job.
Yeah.
God has a plan for me.
Yeah.
This is something that I haven't told anybody yet, and I guess I'm going to say it here. I just went to the doctor the other day because they found a new virus. It's called a BK virus. It's common amongst transplant recipients. And they told me that this virus can potentially destroy my kidney, which I just received. And man, for me, it's kind of hurts because I'm like, I feel like a strong level of responsibility for this kidney. I got to take care of myself. But at the same time, I know that God didn't bring me this far, to just let me down.
Yeah.
And, as the doctor and everybody was explaining to me what the pros and the cons, and he said to me, well, the only way to treat it is for your body to be able to fight it. The only way for your body to be able to fight it is we have to reduce your anti-rejection medication. And if we reduce your anti-rejection medication, then the odds of you rejecting your kidney grow. So it's kind of like, bad on both sides. So I told my doctor, I said, Doc, if you haven't learned one thing yet from dealing with me, is that God's on my side. And he laughed and he said to me, you're right. Everything that we've encountered up until now that's been gruesome, God's seen you through it. So for me, again, this is just a testimony of my personal life, not only in my finances, but in obedience. And I think that this is what it comes down to, Brother James. Our finances, our giving to the Lord, our tithing, it's not about the money. The Lord doesn't need our money. Let's be real. He owns everything.
He does.
It is about obedience and gratitude. And I don't know about you. I have so many more reasons than any to be grateful to the Lord.
Yeah, me too.
And to be obedient. I was disobedient for a long time. And I know what that brought me. And in the short time that I have been obedient to the Lord, I've also seen what that's brought me. So I encourage those of you who are watching our podcast today, like Brother James said in that verse, test me on this. Be obedient to the Lord and see what God will do for you. Test him and watch the wonders that God will do in your life, because I can be a personal testimony to those things. Brother James can be a personal testimony to those things. And there's so many people out there that believe and follow the Lord that can tell you that in the moment where you feel like everything is over and you're against the wall, that's when God shows up. And again, Brother James, I think that it comes down to the obedience and the gratitude to the Lord is where our giving comes from and should come from.
Yes, sir.
So, Brother James, I want to thank you very much
Thank
for
you for
spending the
inviting
time
me.
with us today. And, again, this is a subject that not many like to touch, but I hope that in one way or another, this was edifying to your life and to your soul. And again, I challenge you to test the Lord in these things. If you feel that, a certain church that's mismanaging money and you're not going to feel comfortable, don't give. Give somewhere that you're comfortable, but give, because the Lord wants to see your obedience. He wants to see your trust in him, and he wants to bless you. Don't cut that blessing by being disobedient to the Lord. I want to thank you guys for watching. And I want to remind you that if this podcast has touched you in a special way, if you'd like to learn more about the Lord, I want you to email me at isgodrealshow@gmail.com. Again, that's isgodrealshow@gmail.com. Also, if you're in the Oklahoma City area and you would like to congregate with us, we are at 8300 South Santa Fe Avenue in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73139. We would love to have you. We're here every Sunday morning at 10:15 a.m. And if you get here a little early, we have a beautiful brother that brings us donuts. So you can have some donuts and some coffee. And we would love to have you here at our church locally. If you are watching us from anywhere around the world, we are part of an organization called the Church of God of Prophecy. We have churches all across the world. You can contact me at isgodrealshow@gmail.com, and we would love to put you in contact with a local church. And if you don't want to join our church, I invite you to go to a church near you that is God-fearing and Bible preaching. And please congregate, search for the Lord. And if you search for him, you will find him. Again, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
From the heart,
Spell love to me. It starts with J and ends with S. In the dark of the world, sins need to be confessed. Darkness, people wanting lust over love. Insanity called normality. This world needs the one above. Lord, deliver me from all of this insanity. I see now, heaven is where you destined me. My savior, my shield, all that you can be. Flaming sword in the darkness, piercing through the enemy. The Omega, the reigning king. All glory to the name that rules all states of being. What's to fear when the greatest is near? Can you feel his presence? The king is here with all the evil in this world. The solution is one. God, I think it's time. It's time you send your son. But first, let me speak to the people of earth. Tell them all the great things of your kingdom of rebirth. To whomever may hear this, know one thing. The Lord is almighty, the ruler of everything. All heads will bow, all knees will fall before the almighty one who rules it all.
Lord, won't you save me from all of this insanity? Seems like all my loved ones have already abandoned me.